Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. I'm Brandon Jaffe. Join us as we explore relationship and mental health issues by weeding out the trends in the mental health industry to uncover what truly works in improving our emotional well-being and relationships. At Inspired Resolutions Counseling, we specialize in providing interventions and resources for families with teens, focusing on topics such as teen mental health, parenting challenges, and family dynamics. In this episode, I'm going to talk about bullying. This is one of those things I talk about often. I've talked about it on other episodes. I think that I take a little bit different stance than a lot of people. Several years ago, we began this real big campaign and push in the mental health field, in the school field, to address bullying. And that is a good thing. But I've seen a lot of programs. I've participated in different presentations. I've read some of these curriculums. And quite frankly, like many things in mental health, I think that we're missing the mark. It's due to, in my mind, a lack of being realistic and being honest about what's going on. We all have this movie view on bullying, and that's just not going to work. If we're going to make change as far as bullying goes, that's just not going to work. The movie view of bullying is you've got the bully, who's the bad guy. You've got usually the nerdy looking or weaker seeming teen who is being bullied just because they're different or because they can't do sports as well or various other reasons. But basically it comes down to you've got the strong, mean, inconsiderate bully, and then you've got the more kind-hearted, maybe not so attractive, but that characteristic, that stereotypical bully victim. And honestly, there's so many layers to bullying. It gets so confusing. A lot of times there's a lot of participants. It was interesting because a session that I recently had where bullying came up, it was a discussion for a very long period of time. It was what they had come in initially for. There was crises at school. There was a lot of problems with teachers and at home. And there were so many layers that as a therapist, I really just dug into what my client had control over. And that led us down a pretty interesting journey. The parents at first wanted me to get involved, wanted me to make an assessment. The parents really wanted me to give this child, quote unquote, communication tools so that they could deal with this bullying that they were going through. And that wasn't realistic. There was a combination of things going on. And it was interesting and hard. And it took some really difficult therapeutic sessions to kind of uncover. The client that I'm talking about in some ways fit that stereotypical mold. But what they had a really hard time seeing is that because of some personality issues, because of some lack of awareness on their end, and because of some just not so nice tendencies and impulses, they had created a situation where not just at school, but in their family and in the small community that they were in, this particular person really struggled with getting along with people. And so over time, it created this situation in school where they were being bullied. Now, as we dug in, some of the bullying that was being done was also a response. I was able to get my client to see that some of it was being done in a way to protect themselves from some of this client's, I'm going to say it, and a lot of people might not want to hear me say this, but odd behavior that made people uncomfortable. And my client, it took them a long time to understand, to actually be aware of some of their odd behavior. And so what was really difficult was that while the parents were able to see that they didn't like some of the child's behaviors in the home, that all went out the window and was totally forgotten when it came to figuring out the social issues, the bullying issues, the behavioral issues at the school. It was and is a really interesting case because as we uncovered some of the dynamics, the behaviors that created tension in relationships, it was something that could be seen in some of the parents' behavior. And we all know we've seen that, but it's interesting that that doesn't get talked about when we're addressing bullying. At our center, we try very hard to address the family as a whole. And more than other practitioners and centers, I think that we have a greater tendency to call it in an honest way, to reflect what is going on. We try to find the kindest way possible, but sometimes the reflection is just going to hurt some feelings. And so this family, as we reflected some of the behaviors, some of the patterns in the family, some of the difficulties in relationship that now seem to be somewhat generational, I had a really hard time with it at first, but after significant work in the family, we're coming on the other end of it, where some relationships are being built that wouldn't have been there before. And there's support in the family. There's an acknowledgement as a whole in the family that it's more important to focus on what the family and the individuals in the family can control, which is their behavior, their attitudes, their understanding of the world, their interpretation of behaviors that they see and experience. And it's been a really interesting case because what started out as a bullying case and me being asked to just give some communication tools and protective tools has really turned into digging into family patterns that have been going on for a long time, really digging into social skills work. The work has also been geared towards adjusting attitudes and adjusting the framework or the narrative that the family as a whole has been taking in the world. I bring that case up because there's a dynamic that I haven't seen in many, if any, of the bullying programs. And that's the idea that, hey, look, not all bullies are the perpetrators or the antagonists that we see in the movies. In fact, a lot of people's bullies, so to speak, are seen by a lot of other people as likable, as people who help, people who care, people who love, people who have their back. What's really hard for somebody who's been bullied is that they have experienced a side of somebody that may just be outright mean to them, but they've experienced a side that not necessarily everybody else in the world has experienced. And that sets up this dynamic, this thing that we teach in society that I don't think is healthy. I don't like that parents teach it, teachers teach it, mentors teach it. And that's this idea that the people who are being bullied, if you are smart enough or work hard enough, that someday the bullies are going to get their penance, so to speak, and you are going to come out on top. That's just not the case. Even if your bully is just a really mean, terrible person to everybody, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to come out on top and that they are going to get their karma, so to speak. And the reason I don't like that message is that it puts this hope and expectation on something that's really unhealthy, that is rooted in the failure of others in the world. And we all have certain dynamics. I have people who think that I am terrible, and I have people who think that I am amazing and have brought light to their world. We have different relationships, different dynamics, and then we also have different seasons, different maturity levels at different developmental stages of our life. In any way, shape, or form, putting focus on, hey, you're going to be okay, and the people who bully aren't, sets people up, I think, for a lifelong resentment and almost this waiting to grow. Now, you'll notice I didn't say waiting to heal. I said waiting to grow. When I'm dealing with clients in the center regarding bullying, I don't spend too much time on the obvious, oh, you're good, you're smart, it's going to be okay when you're older. I don't really spend any time on that. My goal is to help them focus on the things that they can control, the areas for growth that they can get focused on and get busy with, get engaged with. It almost becomes this shift of you're focused on the damage that's been done to you, And we do want to focus on healing, and we want to focus on, are there ways to get you out of the firing line, so to speak? We definitely, when you're dealing with bullying, you definitely want to help them problem solve the immediate problem. Like if you're being made fun of, or you're being beat up, or there's something going on a regular basis, you're being bullied online, we want to solve the immediate problem. And a lot of that times that means getting you out of the way the best we can of the abuse, right? The abusive behavior. We don't want you being told on a daily basis that you're terrible. So we want to get you out of that line. We don't want you involved online if it's this constant negative feedback loop for you. A lot of times it's getting you participating in things that aren't harmful and finding ways to get you disengaged from the things that are harmful. And sometimes I don't get too involved with this. By the time clients come to me, if there's any legal issues or there was drastic actions taken by the school, that usually has already happened. It's very rare, but I've had to make recommendations. I've actually, because bullying has been abusive and can be abusive behavior, I've had to make CPS calls. You got to understand that it is more important to get focused on the things that you can control, which means your healing, improving your social skills. It might mean becoming more aware of how you affect others and what others might have to protect themselves from when it comes to your personality or your behavior in the world. That can be a really hard shift for a lot of people. And it's one that I've had pushback from parents and administrators a couple of times, or the family of the person who's being bullied. But it's a really important shift. And remember, bullies don't always see themselves as the bully, and people around them don't necessarily see them as the bully. And that's sometimes really hard for outsiders, for adults to kind of figure out. Again, you want to figure these situations out in order to protect people. But when you go too far down the rabbit hole of seeing the bully as just a bully, what happens is you go down a road where you're almost obsessed with them and your healing depends on them. A lot of times, you know what? The people you thought were horrible in your life, they grow to be better people, and they may not even remember anything they did to you. And that's important because a lot of times, as I'm uncovering the bullying patterns or the behavioral patterns in my client, we'll realize that they themselves have bullied other people or treated other people poorly. And so you never really find somebody who's been bullied who's this innocent person who would never bully somebody else. And so that's another dynamic of bullying that's not often talked about. And that's a lot of bullying comes from developmental truths and stages of life, and then just being human. Adults bully adults all the time. There's so many layers to deciphering. Is this bullying? Is this just a reaction to how the person acts in the world? Is it something else? And so what we do know is that there are some characteristics that lead people to a place where they're more likely to get bullied. We know that there are some personality traits and there are some habits, there are some attitudes that push people away and trigger them. And it's important to pay attention to that. The people that you are bullied by sometimes have feedback that's important. It's just coming in a terrible way and you don't want to hear it. And so one thing that I've helped people do is reframe the feedback that they're getting in a way that can be used for growth rather than just anger and hatred and shutting down and damage. And I think that becomes really an important piece to the work that we do with kids who have a history of being bullied. There's this other dynamic to bullying, and that's the teachers, the administrators, the parents. Look, we've got in a single school, you have so many different thoughts on the world, thoughts on life, thoughts on what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And you're never going to come to an agreement of completely over whether or not somebody's totally wrong. I've seen it. I've watched administrators try to uncover, and every once in a while it's like this clear cut, this is bullying, this is just a really mean person doing really mean things, usually to multiple people. But a lot of times it becomes a lot more complicated than that. And it often has to do with beliefs, has to do with culture, has to do with any number of things. But when you take a look at the teacher, parent, staff participation in bullying, those systems are crucial to target. And I don't think bullying programs do a very good job of targeting those systems. The fact is, often teachers, and I'm seeing it more and more now, I don't know if it's because the world as a whole is just in a really emotional state or what, but I'm hearing more than ever. I've been in practice for 24 years. I'm seeing more than ever that teachers are acting in an unprofessional manner and lashing out and becoming very emotional with kids. And then parents are often responding that way, and administrators are often responding that way. Now, I don't want to call it, look, schools have a tough job, tougher than ever. There's more to manage. I think that this is, I don't want to say as a whole, like the school system's doing poorly, because that's just not true. Man, teachers are in such a tough position. Man, a good teacher is literally a saint. But there are some administrators and teachers who are responding from an emotional state instead of remembering that they are the professional in the room. And so a lot of times I'll see that it's this, I'm taking sides or I'm getting involved in an emotional way, rather than relying on policy and professionalism. And that might be when you're dealing with the bullying that has been uncovered, or somebody has accused somebody of bullying, or it might just be an everyday difficult dealing with children deal. I can remember a student describing for me this teacher who did not get along with them. And don't get me wrong, this particular teen was doing some things that were defiant. Not terribly defiant, but they were going late to class. They weren't doing their work type thing. They weren't cussing, yelling, or causing chaos in the room. But this particular student had a personality that just wasn't easy to click with. And this particular teacher took great offense that when students did not get good grades or didn't try in their class. And that's not professional. Look, when you don't try in a class, you get a certain grade. When you do try and you follow through and you ask for help, you get a better grade. Teachers are meant to get involved and supportive of their students, and you get to know your students. And so you can't be a robot, don't get me wrong. But there should be a level of professionalism where you don't take it personally. And when I've worked with kids and families who bring these really complicated stories of bullying where teachers were involved and the teachers being accused of participating and all this other stuff, what I uncover a lot of times is that there's this level of unprofessional behavior going on in the teacher, as well as a level of almost taking it personally. Your job is to be a teacher who follows policy, follows through, connects with the kids. But when you can't get through, or when you have a defiant child, it is not your job to become emotionally involved. It's your job to follow policy, not take it personally, and put your efforts where they are being appreciated. In this particular case that I'm thinking of, it would have made all the difference in the world, because the emotional engagement of the teacher resulted in the child feeling bullied. And quite frankly, some of the things that the teacher said, it was bullying, but feeling bullied by the teacher, feeling bullied by the kids and other kids in the school, one in particular in this classroom, and the damage that was done all over the place, I think could have been minimized had there been stronger policies followed through with, had the adults that were involved not taken things so personally, including the parents, had both social skills and mental health help been asked for sooner, had there been boundaries put in place so that there could be some space, so to speak, between this particular student who came to me for being bullied and some of the kids who were identified as the perpetrators. It was a very difficult case to unlock and follow. I think that we in the mental health profession and the people who are involved in the school system, I think that we have a duty from here on out to do a better job of addressing the dynamic that the adults play and how they are involved in the damage that can be done by some of these conflictual and difficult bullying scenarios. There's this balance that's really hard to figure out. And I think that if we as professionals kept a conversation going, it's the balance of getting involved, but not so much that you cause more damage. Participating in a way that's professional and helpful, but also putting accountability on the person being bullied as well as the bullies. And then helping everybody as a group who's involved to be more honest about the things that we can control. And it's really easy to get caught up in the things that you wish were and could be, rather than here's what we have, here's what's in front of us, here's the best, most healthy way to put one foot in front of the other. Now, it is a beginning conversation when it comes to bullying, and it's something that my center is dedicated to trying to help the community figure out in a better way and help people who have been involved in that and experienced that, help their healing so that their adult lives aren't plagued by the experience they have when it comes to bullying. And it's wild because so many people say the same thing, that the most significant and terrible bullying that they experience is during the junior high years. And there's got to be something there that we can address. And just as a side note, I think that there's so much more structure in the elementary teaching protocols. And one thing, and this is not research-based, but one thing I've observed is that when the 7th and 8th grade is still a part of that elementary school system, for whatever reason, there is less bullying. And I almost wonder if we have not been honest with ourselves about how we run the middle school system. I almost think that some of these middle school systems that jump into the high school way of doing things are doing it prematurely, and that maybe we need more guidance and more structure and less trying to transition the kids into high school. Because let's be honest, you get to transition into having different classes at different times, and you can figure that out. But what I've observed is that a lot of the bullying patterns are ramping up or beginning and then being carried into high school from junior high. And so I wonder if that's something that we as society, we as a community can take a look at. There's so many dynamics to this, and I've just scratched the surface. Even if you don't agree with what I'm saying, I hope maybe this podcast will get some people talking in a little bit different direction, and maybe a more dynamic and helpful direction when it comes to bullying.
The Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast is an Inspired Resolutions production. Hosted by Brandon Jaffe. Edited and mixed by Natalie Atkinson. Music by Natalie and Sean Atkinson. Inspired Resolutions Counseling is based in Yorba Linda, California. Whether you're interested in joining our group, seeking therapy services, or exploring more of our resources, you can find us on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Inspired Resolutions Counseling.